Now we've all been to a restaurant or on a plane where that one freaking kid is running around or kicking the back of your seat.
Talk much to each other.
Hey, give me that! Come on, I need it too. Yeah.
And lo and behold, you look around and find their parents with their face buried in their phones. Or worst off, nowhere to be found at all. And don't lie to me, we've all dreamed about punning that little bastard across the room.
No. Let me take a look. No.
Hey, come here. If you don't stop screwing around back there, this is what I'm gonna do with you.
But if you think this is just first world problems in 2025, just imagine how bad it was in the early 1900s. Now let's take a trip back to 1897, where J.C. Ware was contracted for building grandstands for the highly anticipated Cal-Stanford football game. But by kickoff, J.C. was astounded. The grandstands he had built for 10,000 people were now flooded with over 15,000. And worst of all, a gaggle of kids who had dodged security were now perched on top of the grandstand roof. But the more he tried to protest, the more the crowd just pushed him aside. And as the game progressed, JC kept glancing over, hoping the structure he built to hold off rain would hold up to the weight of the boys. And to his surprise, as the final whistle blew, the structure was still standing. But just as the fans erupted in applause, Ware's heart sank. The grandstand gave way. It was over in an instant. People rushed to pull debris off of the others. And to their amazement, where there should have been bodies, only a 10-year-old boy needed emergency care. This accident offered a glimpse into the future. Many warning signs were given, yet opportunities to prevent future disasters were ignored. Now fast forward 3 years. The turn of the century also marked the end of an era. Since its beginning, the Cal-Stanford rivalry has been played in San Francisco on Thanksgiving Day. But after this game, they would alternate between campuses and play the game later in the season to avoid the holiday itself. The final Thanksgiving game in San Francisco was held in the heart of the Mission District, right next to the newly built San Francisco Pacific Glass Works. This massive factory, soon to be the largest of its kind west of Chicago, employed around 750 people. Inside the factory was a massive brick furnace that reached over 3,000 degrees. Inside its white-hot walls, 15 tons of molten glass churned, tended to by only a skeleton crew. And while all this is going on, just hours before the game, fans packed into the stadium just feet from the Pacific Glass Works. And for those unwilling to pay the $1 general admission, the rush was on to find another way to see the game. Herman Gulang, an 11-year-old student, first tried scrambling under a fence, but was chased away by security. Then he climbed the water tower, but the view was obscured. Finally, he joined the swarm of people pushing into the most obvious vantage point, the Glassworks building. It's speculated that the plant superintendent, James Davis, was offering a fee to watch the game from the plant roof. But in the end, there was no proof and plausible deniability. In no time at all, nearly 400 people had crammed onto the roof, many sitting on the factory ventilators, which were just corrugated roofing used to vent the hot white furnace below. But none of this deterred any of the spectators, because this was the perfect view stretching from one end of the field to the other. And the biggest problem of this all? The flimsy structure was only built to bear its own weight, nothing more. All of them were laughing and gesturing. Some of the fellas even said, if this thing breaks, we all go down together.
We ride together. We die together. Bad boys for life.
Suspenseful music. Dun, dun, dun. Now with this being the turn of the century, with absolutely no building permits or enforcement codes, things went to hell real quick. Just 20 minutes after kickoff, the crowd tensed as Cal made its first trip into Stanford territory. Then a crash from the north side of the field that temporarily brought the game to a halt. The roof of the Glassworks building collapsed like a gallows trapdoor. Necks craned and people stood still. No one could see exactly what had happened. And after a few moments, all the eyes went back onto the field and play continued. No one aware of the hell unfolding next door. And the first man to realize the full scope of the horrors almost fell victim himself. Charles Yotes, an oven man at the factory, had been tending the fires when bodies began raining down, narrowly missing him. He frantically tried to pull people off the furnace with a giant poker, while his partner ran to shut off the oil feeding the blaze inside. And officials later estimated the surface temperature of the shell of the furnace was well over 500 degrees. Jeter, another factory worker, would later be quoted as saying, "It was a horrible experience, standing there beside a hell pot and seeing human beings roasted alive." One man witnessed his friend hanging from the rafters, holding on for dear life before his grip finally gave out. He fell into the furnace, his body curling like a worm from the intense heat. Rescuers were staggered by what they found. Bodies scattered everywhere, desperate moans from the injured, and an inescapable smell of burnt flesh. At first, it seemed as if hundreds must be dead. And with all this going on, none of this made a difference to the game being played less than 50 yards away. Those in the high bleachers could see a fury of ambulance outside, and some could hear police sirens. But with no real way to communicate through the noise, hard information was slow to spread through the crowd and never reached the players. The game was settled in the final minutes by a single score. At the final whistle, Stanford fans rushed the field, carrying their star players on their shoulders and beginning their parade down Market Street. But soon, their joy would be overshadowed by the horrific scene next door. While the tragedy claimed victims of various ages, the oldest being a 46-year-old miner, most were boys and young men, the youngest being Lawrence Mile, who had just turned 19 a month earlier. In total, 23 people lost their lives that day, and over 100 more were severely injured. And with a scene straight from a Hollywood movie, you would think this would be front page news, or at the very least, be covered by the Stanford student paper, right? Well, you'd be very wrong. The Stanford Daily ran a 1,500-word front page story about the victory, without a single mention of the disaster that happened 50 feet away. The Cal newspaper reacted the same way. The only reference to the tragedy was a brief mention a week later about a rumored Christmas Day rematch to raise money for the victims. And unfortunately, like all great cover-ups, that never happened. And speaking of great cover-ups, who was to blame for all this, you might ask? You're going to be very surprised. Just 7 days after the disaster, and 4 days after Fred Lilly, the 21-year-old son of a wealthy New York merchant, became the 22nd fatality, a jury delivered the verdict, and the blame was placed on the victims. Their reasoning? The deceased had no business being there. No one could be held responsible for their deaths other than themselves. You can't make this up. More than a century later, this catastrophe is still the deadliest sporting event in American history, and yet it's almost entirely forgotten. Unlike the 1898 or 1899 big games, there is no statue commemorating the 1900 contest. There's no plaques at the site, now home of the University of San Francisco building, and you'll barely find a mention of it in local history text. And so, the tragedy that should have changed everything was simply erased. So the next time you have a little asshole kicking your seat on a plane, or just running around being a menace, just close your eyes and picture them falling into molten glass, 3,000 degrees. Oh yeah. I'll see you guys next time.